For this episode, we are here with Kevin Doyle, our guest. Kevin is the founder of Invista Farms, an indoor farm that grows herbs and leafy greens at multiple locations in the Mid-Atlantic. Kevin, welcome.
Thank you for having me. I'm looking forward to our chat.
For today, we're going to focus on the economics of indoor farming. You certainly have plenty of experience. And we're going to cover some highlights on the who, when, where, and what of you and your career.
Sounds great.
So, before the economics of indoor farming, let's touch on some personal background. Kevin, tell us and the audience here, where did you grow up?
I was born and raised in Long Island, New York, and then I went to Villanova University outside of Philadelphia, and now I live in suburban Maryland in the Crofton area near Annapolis, so I'm happy to be back here in Philadelphia.
That's awesome, and I know that one of the farms, I guess it's in Bel Air, is pretty close to where you live. Is that within a 30-40 minute run to commute?
Well, the Glen Burnie farm is 20 minutes, and the Bel Air farm is about 40 minutes, and the Bel Air farm is about an hour from here.
Great, and from a work lifestyle just sort of combination, are you finding that that rhythm isn't too taxing in terms of the commute? It's a relatively tight drive.
Oh, it's really easy.
Good, because I think sometimes we get, if you hear these stories in Los Angeles, people driving like over an hour, it's amazing. Or even sometimes in the suburbs of New York or Philadelphia, the commute can run north of 20 minutes. So good work keeping the carbon footprint low and doing something that's good for the people and the environment. With first job, I'm always sort of curious, back in grade school or high school, give us a little indication of where you maybe got started.
Oh boy, let me see. My first job was I delivered newspapers for Newsday. I had a route that was about 45 homes. I got a nickel a paper, well, they charged a nickel a paper weekday and a quarter on Sunday. And then every Saturday we would go and pay. And so my budget that I ran was about $30.
That's classic, and I know that the paper routes are probably less of an income source for young people now that the digital age has come upon us.
That's probably
right?
true.
Fair to say. So you're like me as part of the not quite like that old school baby boom, but definitely raised in a world without screens.
Yes.
Right? Making some money at an early age. Other quick personal background and just information. It's always nice to get a little flavor. Your favorite fruit?
Oh boy, I would have to say an orange.
Good, I think that's a great pick. And vegetable?
Broccoli.
There you go. Broccoli, by the way, loaded with the antioxidants. I know with microgreens.
There you
They're
go.
really a superfood. Okay, from a meal standpoint, as a farmer, I'm always interested in how people would shape their meal. But tell me the story of a kind of a dream meal, like a Last Supper.
Oh boy, I think it would be probably halibut with some risotto.
Look at you. And are you a chef, by the way? Do you cook the fish and the risotto?
I do.
That's awesome.
I have 3 kids that need to eat, and they like to eat. They're all athletes, and so I cook a lot.
And there would be some lettuce. We're going to talk about what's in front of us,
course.
in terms of the produce on the side, I imagine, as well. Okay, little known fact about Kevin Doyle.
Little known fact, I was blessed enough to play college lacrosse at Villanova University and also coach there as well.
Nice. So with that sports, do you keep up with it? I know there's sometimes men's leagues. Do you ever throw the ball around? I played a little lacrosse
I did
as well.
up until 35 when I had my first child, and I couldn't afford to get hurt, so that was the end of it.
Exactly. Okay, life motto. Anything that you can share with us, sort of a go-to?
No reverse.
Interesting. So that you're looking in the windshield versus the rear view mirror.
Well, yeah, we're always going forward.
I love it. That's great. And I know with the controlled environment agriculture, what we're going to talk about going forward involves not taking food from 2,000 miles away, as we have since the Second World War, and moving it across the country to the East Coast. Right? You're providing food near.
Correct. Yep.
Closer from farm to table than I think just about anyone else in the whole country. Okay, examples of sustainable living in your personal life.
Well, we do our best to drink a lot of water, and we try to keep our carbon footprint down by working and living close to work. We like growing food, and we like taking old things and repurposing them. So adaptive reuse of real estate or land, people, anything.
I love it, and I know with some of the adaptive reuse, with the poultry buildings, you and I got to meet down, I think it was 2 or 3 years ago now, maybe even 4, with converting, and the friction of like the system in terms of rules for how they were cleaned became a challenge. So that adaptive reuse has been in your business life thinking as well as your personal life.
Well, I started with a career in commercial real estate, resetting buildings in suburban Philadelphia, and then I got into this about 8, 9, 10 years ago almost, and I started it in Maryland with a small church that renovated an old Heckinger's, not to date myself, and we put a farm in the outdoor section where you would go to Heckinger's to buy your hoses and sprinklers and things like that, and we set up a small farm there. And then from that, we had a congressional luncheon, which led to being invited to do work on the Eastern Shore, which was the adaptive reuse of poultry houses, and we renovated a couple of them and put together protocols to deal with all the ammonia and all the disease and bacteria and everything else, and so we helped do that. And then in 2019, I guess it was, we set up Vista Farms in an old warehouse of a printing company that made labels and stuff for McCormick spices that went out of business. And we've been there for the last 3 years or so, and then we just expanded into Bel Air, and we're moving down to Virginia to be closer to population centers. So all trying to keep our footprint down.
I love it, and that's a great setup with the reference to Vista Farms, which you founded.
Mm-hmm.
An essential business philosophy as we start to transition this discussion towards the economics of indoor farming. Share with us sort of what's driven Vista with your leadership as a philosophy.
Well, the main thing is I try to use it as a teaching tool to make people better. So we do a lot of work with schools. University of Maryland, we've hired a bunch of interns and then actually turned them into full-time employees. We're involved with some programs with Bowie State University, Morgan State University. So teaching and expanding kind of nutrition awareness for people that might not have access to it typically. And then also from a lifestyle, and treat people the way you want to be treated. So if you treat everyone like a CEO, then you never have to worry about insulting anyone or mistreating anyone, and go from there.
I know that there's so much noise in the space about robotics and super advanced systems. I believe having known you and seeing the locations, the LED lights are
Yep.
hyper advanced. But in terms of a philosophy about robotics and advanced technology, share with us, what you're thinking there.
Well, I'm an old guy, and I grew up watching cartoons. And so my 2 favorite cartoons are both the Flintstones, which you may remember Fred and Barney went to work every day, lived in the Stone Age, and they worked in a quarry, and they made big rocks into little rocks that turned into toasters and TVs and cars and all kinds of things. And when their toaster broke, they threw the rock out the window and made a new toaster, and they were away working. And then my other favorite show was the Jetsons, which was from, I think, like the 24th century, I guess. And it was all futuristic stuff, and you'd clap your fingers, snap your fingers, and things would pop out of the wall and the floor, and people were flying around in spaceships and all kinds of things. And so my philosophy is, if I treat the business like the Flintstones, you never have trouble, A, training people or replacing parts. And if you treat it like the Jetsons, the cost involved and the work and the people and the technology and everything you need to be involved makes it harder to open it up to more people.
I love that whole mentality of finding a balance, which is we get seduced sometimes with technology, thinking that it's the answer to so many things. But then if the burden, and we'll touch on this with the economics, is cost and maintenance, and the system breaks down, you're adding cost necessarily in areas of support that wouldn't, in an unnecessary world of the Flintstones, be a cost center.
Right.
Yeah, and I think self-reliance, if I know you enough as a driver, not being able to fix it, if the robot breaks, you and I don't have
Everyone's out of business.
advanced computer degrees.
Right.
With your own vehicle, for example, have you noticed just this trend in the last 10 years that like you can't change out the spark plugs necessarily because you can't get to them,
Right.
under the hood? So this is interesting with a cost breakdown and some of just the fundamentals. Let's dig into this economics of indoor farming and tell us what we have in front of us here so we can share a little bit on the visual.
Sure. So I brought some leafy greens, which is a New Ham lettuce, which is a hybrid of a butter type lettuce and a romaine. And then I brought just a romaine. And these are all small that restaurants like because they like to be able to use whole leaves in their servings.
And just for the audience that's listening, these are running in the cups about 8 inches high. When they go to maturity over the course of 5 weeks?
About 5 weeks. These are about 3.5 to 4 weeks old.
I was going to say these look like they're half to 3/4 of the way grown. And with the root structure, for those again listening, it looks like you've wrapped them, and that's on a grow cube, the medium that goes in the water.
So that is an inert material, which is the only thing that is not organic in our entire process. And it's just a sponge cube that we put the seeds in, use for germination. And then Charlie, you can extend that, you can unwrap the roots, and we grow in deep water culture, which is about 8 inches deep. But you can see how white and healthy the roots are, and it's very easy to maintain, and they grow very well and very consistently in a similar environment.
My hand from pinky to thumb extended is about 8 inches, so these roots look like they're at least 10, maybe even 12.
Probably longer than that.
And so, how deep is the bed that holds the water in your flotation system?
It's about 8 inches.
Got you. So they rest sometimes on the bottom and they go laterally to the sides, or
Well,
they spread out?
So we have a little current, because the water is always recycling. So the water is always moving. And so I haven't filmed them under the flotation devices that we use to hold the plants. But I would imagine that there's some sort of movement to the roots. They're not just sitting on the bottom.
Understood, right? They're flowing sort of with, it's almost like a creek that you're
Yes.
creating, right? There's a
Exactly.
pump that moves the water. For those that haven't been to an indoor facility, and I'm thinking of the one in Glen Burnie, the deep water system, imagine, I guess if you could describe it, I think it's about 8 feet wide in a prior conversation, and
So our
30
tables
feet.
are roughly 8 feet wide and about 40 feet long. And they hold about 1,600 gallons of water. And they're continuously flowing, gravity fed out through the bottom. They go to a reservoir, and then the water is pumped back in while being continuously mixed and treated with oxygen.
So 8 inches by 8 feet, and you said 30?
40 feet.
Oh, 40 feet long. So in terms of gallons, I remember some statistic, I think it's something like 6 or 7 gallons of water in a cubic foot. Does that sound right?
Well, we're 1,600 gallons roughly in that bed.
Got it. So 8 by 40 is 320 square feet. That makes sense. I'm just doing some quick math. If it was a foot deep.
So then 8 inches is 2/3 of a foot. So 320, right, goes down to
Call it a couple.
240 cubic feet. So if you want to go 240 times 7 is about 1,600 gallons.
And what did you say your gallon count is?
1,600 gallons.
There it is. So again, I like for the audience to share math, and we
Okay,
can
good stuff.
at least
All
just
about it.
crunch the numbers. So it's basically a shallow swimming pool that is built at about waist height, or describe visually how you build this. It's a plywood sort of decking.
Well, no, so we use everything we can get basically, except for the LED lighting we get from Home Depot.
Okay.
So we use warehouse racking, which is the green and orange stuff that you see in any industrial building. And then with that comes racking, which is the foundation of the table. That sits about 12 inches high. And then the borders and everything is, we use the pink rigid insulation board from Home Depot. And we use the 1.5 inch stuff, so it has some rigidity to it. So we lay the bottom of that on the floor, and then we put PVC pond liner around it.
And when you say floor, I've seen those troughs though, but they feel like they're more like at waist height, so you can lift the.
Well, you're talking about full, right? So I'm talking about the bed.
Okay, so understood. The floor is of the planting bed,
Yes.
not the floor of the warehouse.
No, yes, right. So I said it's
Understood.
about 12 inches above ground.
Gotcha. Where the water starts?
Yes.
Gotcha. And then if you do a double rack, you could have one that might
Then we
be.
have the next one about, the top is about 5'3", so that most of our people can see over it without any sort of stepping on anything, no ladder, no steps, no in it.
Understood. And you also need that distance, as far as I understand it, correct me if I'm wrong, so that the light is not blasting too heavily onto the plants at the lower level. Is that a fair?
That's true.
statement?
So we use low energy LED lights, so they don't give off a lot of heat. But also we want ventilation too, because the plants aspirate, they breathe a little bit. So we want them to be able to, breathe and not be smothered and not have too much, closed in.
Let's get to some of the math then, in terms of and this is again, all the theme in the economics. With cost for that bed, that 8-foot by 40-foot bed, what are we looking at, just sort of order of magnitude from that big box Home Depot level of cost for racking, wood, the liner?
Well, there is no wood.
Oh, I'm sorry, the foam boards are
Right.
what you're using
Uh-huh.
on that base. So supplies that go in to infrastructure, so the fixed cost versus the variable cost of seeds and all those things.
So a one-level rack will cost about $7,000 all in, not including lighting.
Great. And from that infrastructure level, how many holes in terms of planting units are at one time on that grow bed?
So it depends on what we're growing. So basil, which is here, is a denser crop. So we have about 4.5 holes per square foot.
Okay, so 4.5 holes per square foot.
Times 320.
And what do you know I could do the math, but where are we?
It's about 1,400 holes.
Okay, great. And what I'm trying to get to in the math is if it's $7,000 for that bed, the incremental upfront cost per unit becomes an interesting number because you want to recoup your money.
Mm-hmm.
Part of the challenge with indoor farming in general, with controlled environment agriculture, is startup costs have
Right.
been perceived as too high to change the momentum of migrant field farming all through California and Arizona, with moving those heads of lettuce and basil and things to the East Coast. So this is interesting. Like with the 7,000 to 1,400, there you are at 50 cents. Am I doing the math right? Per unit to get started.
Well, it'd be about 70 cents, but that's okay, right?
Okay.
1,400.
Understood. Thank you. That helps. With the LED lights, now that unit, that rack system goes up.
Yeah, that's what I have 70 cents for, including lighting, which is about $3,000. So a total of $10,000.
Got you. Okay. When it comes to the double racks, obviously there's an efficiency in square footage of land, like the warehouse space, but it's not necessarily saving.
And the support mechanisms. So,
You're saying the columns that go up to hold the racking can be doubled up.
right, and there's a layer because the lighting has to be suspended from something. So the floor is already in for the second level. So you're really just in it for lights and the liner and a little bit of infrastructure with some plumbing and piping and that kind of thing. So that's about $5,000 or $6,000 more.
So what I'm hearing, and I love this, is back to the Flintstones versus the Jetsons, is once you're building the thing, these posts and the kind of keep it simple, is it makes almost no financial sense to do just one planting bed level when you've paid for the steel, for
Right.
the rack, you might as well do two.
Yes,
You've paid for the electricity to be available, you paid for the pump
agreed.
to be near there. Okay, this is really helpful because part of the hope is that shows like this will help incentivize some entrepreneurs, grocery stores to understand that this is a viable way to get better nutrients. We'll talk about the advantages in a second of like locally grown plants, but we want to keep going on the math. So now that covers us for the fixed cost. With your Glen Burnie, how many of those double rack systems do you have operating at any given time?
So in Glen Burnie, I guess we have 12 rack sets of 2.
Perfect. And that yields in a given week how many heads you don't call them heads of basil. What do you call them? They're
We just-
bundles?
Sleeves.
Sleeves, because you sell them live, right?
We
with the
sell them as a
roots.
sleeve.
Order of
Tons.
magnitude for what you're releasing weekly. Do you know that number? Because we can circle back and put it up on the screen. If we take the holes, do you divide the number of holes by
Yeah,
7?
so we have some other things growing there, like we have some lettuce growing and we have different types of things. So I would say we have about 1,200 dozen plants coming out of there,
1,200 dozen. Excellent.
about.
Okay, and again, this is not a test. I'm
And
just
that's
curious, how this math unfolds. With the cost of nutrients that are put into the water and with the cost of the seeds, do you find that economically you're in good shape relative to, say, outdoor farming, where some of those costs are similar? Or how does it shape up? If you had a plot of land next to the indoor farm, would you have similar cost of seeds and similar cost of nutrients, indoors versus outdoors?
Well, so there's some natural nutrients in soil that I don't have to really make up for, but the seeds are the seeds. The difference is every day is the same temperature in my facility. And I don't have to worry about rainy days, I don't have to worry about cloudy days, I don't have to worry about cold, I don't have to worry about hot, I don't have to worry about any of those things because every day is 70 degrees. So when you look at the average farm in Maryland, they get 2 crops, usually a corn crop and a soybean crop or something like that. And they lay fallow for probably a third of the year.
Interesting. That helps put in perspective the difference between usable land and indoor farming, because there is only so much usable land for actually farming as we grow and sprawl through the suburbs. I've heard there's a ratio of like 1 to 10 or even greater, that you can grow 10 times the produce per acre under roof as an acre of land outside, if not even higher. Do you know those numbers? Because it's really interesting.
So I think those numbers are all kind of, they move around depending on what you're growing and where you're growing and how you're growing. But to think about it is, if you have only a small portion of the year to grow, right, and you're not controlling your environment, we've been through countless issues where there's been no leafy greens, no romaine, no, something, because of either some sort of virus or some sort of bacteria that's been attacking the plants, or just weather related. So I don't know what the exact metrics are, but our plants are grown consistently. Every day it's the same temperature, the same people are working on it, and then the plants are harvested on a schedule, and they get delivered the next day to whoever the end user is, whether it's a supermarket or a restaurant or a distributor, and it ends up on a store shelf or on a plate very quickly. So in terms of predictability, it takes 4 weeks to grow a basil plant, takes about 5 or 6 weeks to grow a lettuce plant. You can come in and see our operation and see what is in production, and you can actually know exactly what's happening and be able to predict that this is going to make it. Our success rate of plants is about 95%, maybe more.
So that's a testament to controlled environment agriculture, right? CEA, you
Yeah,
reference it.
absolutely.
You're controlling the temperature, the timing, the sequence, all those things. Do you know if an outdoor farm with field-grown romaine would have a similar 95% success rate, or if that's a lower number with failure?
I would envision it's lower, which is why there are grades to romaine. So there are grades to lettuce, grade A, grade B, grade C. I don't know exactly what they are, but it's similar to apples as well. And so, people look at it different ways. So I don't know the exact math.
So with the loss levels and with the transportation, I'm hoping that controlled environment indoor agriculture can match or beat the cost at wholesale to a grocery store. Do you feel that we're moving in that direction? That if you go to a Giant Food or an Acme or a ShopRite, if they were paying X to have it moved in from California, that you could match or beat that number?
Oh, absolutely. So lettuce and a lot of things are sold as a commodity, right? And so as a commodity, it comes with certain risks that you don't know where it's coming from. So for us, you know exactly where it's coming from, you know exactly when it's planted, who's harvesting it, you know that we have the proper food safety protocols. All our farms are USDA GAP certified, and so there's some safety in terms of traceability from that standpoint. And then also, when you look at just the pure price, I mean, this year romaine has fluctuated from about $15 a dozen to about $52 a dozen.
So let's repeat that. So $15 per dozen to over 50.
$52, which was plus or minus October.
So is that fluctuation due to droughts? Is it due to transportation costs? What impacted that price point so dramatically?
I think it was all the above.
So multiple spokes on the wheel of cost.
Yes.
Labor, perhaps shortages, water cost, nutrient cost, I heard was
No, I
going up.
think it was, to be honest with you, I think there were some viruses that attacked the romaine crops. And then also, there's been some challenges with drought and water in the Southwest.
Well, let's talk about water and cost, because while people don't think about water as having a cost, I have read, and you can maybe corroborate this, that indoor production of a head of romaine lettuce might use 1.5 gallons of water, while outdoor is a staggering 15 gallons, 10 times more water, because it evaporates outside if you have to irrigate than feeding the roots.
I have not seen that research, but I think our crop is actually less than 1 gallon.
So if you divided out what goes in that bed, that swimming pool of the floating rafts, by the number of heads, we could get to the number, because there's not a lot of waste, right? The water stays in the
There's
trough.
no waste. So the only loss is evaporation and from the plant absorbing it.
So transpiration, I think, is what I had taught the kids. I have a 17 and 13-year-old, that the water is drawn up from the roots into the plant, and then it is evaporated out. That transpiration as the plant is growing with photosynthesis.
Right.
So it's leaving
Mhm.
the plant at some point. It's stored in lettuce. I've heard that iceberg lettuce is not as nutritious as romaine because there's just a lot of water in it versus the nutrients. So different plants retain.
Well, I think
I
you
guess
can
water.
judge by the coloring. So the richer the color, the more nutrients of something. And the paler the color, the less nutrients of something. So when you look at the plants in front of you, they're all very green and nice and rich. And So then you see, you know, iceberg lettuce, it starts kind of pale green and then goes to a white.
Yeah, yeah.
And
Not as much goodies in it.
Right, so not as much nutrients.
So let's stay on nutrients for a second with transportation, because I've read that one of the advantages of locally grown produce is that it's not sitting on trucks, trains, or airplanes for 4 or 5 days from the time it's cut to the time it's delivered. What do you know about the nutrient retention?
Well, 2 or 3 years ago on Thanksgiving, there was a national recall of romaine, and everyone had to throw out all their romaine. And then the only way they could bring it back was they had to put a sleeve on it, similar to the basil in front of you here, that had a harvest date on it. And so we were tracking the harvest date, and it takes plus or minus 12 days to get across the country.
So slow down. I'm amazed with that number. I would have thought it was inside of a week.
No, not even close.
It's refrigerated along the way to keep it from wilting?
Yes.
That's crazy. So what do we know in our industry here about loss levels of nutrients over something like a staggering 12 days?
So that's being studied. So we're actually working with the USDA. There's some microbiologists down by University of Maryland that we're working with, and we are studying, you know, I'll call it the degradation of nutrients based on a harvested head of lettuce or basil or anything. It's just like anything, you know, once you kill it, you know, you kind of have to deal with it quickly, otherwise it doesn't do too well.
So in your case with Invista, let's take Glen Burnie as an example in Maryland. Are you servicing the Baltimore market that's within 20 minutes, or how far out do you go from that farm to the retail?
So we're going to Northern Virginia, which is about 40 minutes, 45 minutes from there, and into Montgomery County, Maryland, which is northwest DC kind of.
What's that mean in terms of miles? Like, what's the shortest distance from farm to grocery store, and what's the furthest distance?
The closest is about 3 miles.
3 miles, really, down the street.
Yeah, and the furthest is about 40 miles.
Okay, so we're not talking about 12 days. So from the time you cut, or you're not actually cutting, right? You're pulling.
Yep.
And does the romaine get delivered with roots intact, or do you
Yes.
chop it off?
We typically deliver with the roots on.
So not unlike the one that I'm holding.
Just
then,
like that.
Then at the grocery store, do they clip and they put it on the wet wall?
Well, that's up to them.
Got it. Sometimes it
Some
could be
do, some
sold,
don't.
sold with the roots, just like the
Exactly.
basil in the sleeve
Mhm.
is sold. Having those roots intact doesn't give them, I guess, a nutrient boost because there's no soil or water, but it's just alive still.
There is, so it extends the lifespan of it because it's technically not dead. It's still has the roots there, and so if you took it home and put it in water, it will stick around for a while than if you just, you know, left it on your counter.
So that's really interesting. There could be some educational changes for taking something that is dead, like a head of lettuce that would be cut and shipped from California, 12 days old, and throwing it in the crisper in your fridge, versus buying an Invista farm's head of lettuce and potentially putting it in a glass with the roots and the water on your sill.
On your windowsill, yep.
Because a lot of people don't eat the lettuce the day they buy it. I've seen, you know, friends, you go over, you're making a burger, barbecue, and throwing some lettuce on it. It might have been there for a week. Then it's 20 days
Right.
from when it was cut. There can't be much left.
Not much left.
And you see them, they're soft, they get a little funky. Okay, that is really, really interesting. In terms of quality of color, I guess what they're doing, you tell me, to preserve the look of the lettuce, they're putting them on some life support. How, do you know the temperatures? I'm just curious how they do it.
Typically, I know they travel, so they can't freeze it. So they travel somewhere in the 34 to 38 degree range.
So they're keeping them hovering above freezing, but basically it's almost cryogenic, trying to keep them looking like they're alive.
Right. So what happens is typically they unbox them and they throw them in a tub of water in the supermarkets, and they absorb water into them because they're dried out as they're moving across the country, you know, at the reduced temperature.
Okay, so interestingly, like anything in life, the more you learn, the more you understand the complexity. And in this case, I'm not saying that it's Hollywood, but I'm saying there's some action that they're taking to create the presence of something that looks and feels, maybe to your touch and then even to your taste, like it's maybe healthier than it actually is.
So they're trimming the stem, so the base of the plant they're trimming, and then they're putting it in cold water and it's being absorbed, the water's being absorbed into the plant, and it's freshening it up.
So have you done tissue testing? I'd be curious to do a side by side. You know, there are labs where you can spend $100 or something and send things out.
We have not done that just because we were asked not to.
Because you'd make the other guys look so bad? You're
Well,
thinking?
yeah, just didn't want that information out there, and so actually, one of our university partners wants to do that research and be able to publish it, so we're waiting with them.
So I know there's one possible motivator to do it, which is there is a perception that indoor agriculture using the LED lights is somehow man-made. There's some artificial factor. It's not like sunlight. And I had a conversation with someone who was in their, 70s, that a photon is kind of a photon,
True.
having seen the LED lights and what they can produce. So it's not that you're making fake lettuce by growing it indoors. It's not a synthetic.
Right.
The controlled environment agriculture, if I'm not mistaken, is using light to do what the sun does for photosynthesis and the water and the nutrients to mimic what is happening in nature and enhance it by controlling it. Is that a fair understanding?
Well, that's exactly correct. I think it's material to talk about the origins of the romaine heart. And why don't you tell me what you think you know about a romaine heart?
I've seen the romaine hearts. Looks like it's the center of the head without the outside leaves, and it's sort of sets of 2, 3, maybe even 4, up to a half dozen, depending on the packaging.
And what color are they?
Lighter green, not the heavy-duty darker green.
So we talked about it, so they probably have very little nutritional value. And as the plant travels across the country, the outer leaves die, and at some point, the only thing left is the romaine heart. And so the lettuce people figured, we better figure out a use for this pale white center of the plant to be able to make it have some sort of value, because that's all that's left.
Wow. So the heart word was a great marketing choice.
Yes.
Because it sounds like it's the beating heart is a positive thing. It's like the center, as opposed to what is the less nutrient,
Less desirable.
leafy substrate. Okay, with that in mind and the politics, the industrial agriculture complex is such a big machine now. I know from climate change, it rivals, if not exceeds, transportation. I mean, the combination of agriculture and industry is not promoted with climate activists as a variable or component for the need of change. They're pushing, and I have one, electric cars and solar panels and all those things. But if we can help with food, we can help the climate. So share with me the politics of how you think we might be able to move the needle forward.
Well, the needle's going to get moved on its own because the Colorado River is going dry, and the water that goes to Southern California and Arizona is drying up. And so the viaducts that have fed all these farms for decades are now being curtailed. And so all the leafy greens that are being grown in the Southern California and Arizona markets are going to go away soon, and those lands are going to go back to being deserts. And if you want leafy greens and you want plants, you're going to have to adaptively bring them closer to population centers. So I believe that every new community should have access to food.
Kevin, I love it, and I know that technology, I think, is on our side with the tailwind. The LED lights have gotten more powerful in terms of their output, and the cost of operating them from an efficiency standpoint has dropped. Is that a fair understanding in your 6 years of running?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we can make the math work. The problem is it's just not sexy, so people don't want to. And so for me, I think that, the way to fix it is to educate the kids. So we do a lot of work with universities, we do a lot of work with schools, and, kids shouldn't think that the only way to get produce is through a chimichanga at a gas station.
Fair enough, that the generation that aspires to be influencers on the internet, not farmers,
Right.
is part of the friction, not so much the politics, just the mindset. Hopefully, shows like this help move the needle. You're productive, you're producing food that is healthy for people and for the planet. So thank you for joining us today.
Absolutely, I appreciate it.
Kevin Doyle, really appreciate it.
Thank you, great time.